Hello, I'm Brigantia, Blackbird of Blackbird's Brew. Happy Sunday. Let's talk about the 9 tenets of Loki. Now, I have been continuing my research on him, as difficult as that admittedly is. But during the course of that, I came across a post on Pinterest and it was titled The 9 Tenets of Loki. Now, sadly, there was no information about the source or why these ideas were attributed to Loki. However, there is something that does ring true to me. That being said, I can already feel people reaching for their smelling salts because horrors. This is unverified personal gnosis. And that's true. However, we have to admit that the lore we've inherited is incomplete and the edits were written by a Christian with a Christian worldview, and that has an effect. We have to take everything with a grain of salt, and, the gods may still give people nudges as they so choose, so I do believe that some of the insights we've had in modern times are the consequence of the gods influencing us. Now, that does not mean that every claim made by every person is 100% true or that it should be accepted on blind faith. No, obviously no. But it is worth having an open mind and considering ideas. So let's go through these. The first is truth. Be real. Be true to yourself as much as you are to others. Now, we do know from the lore that Loki was always a great one for dispensing with illusions, particularly self-imposed illusions that enabled you to pretend that you were who you think you are, as opposed to looking at your actual character and your actual deeds and the ramifications thereof. So I would say that truth is something that is actually important to Loki. And you might say, oh, but he tricked people and he lied in the lore and he did this and he did that. I'm like, yeah. How honest were the gods being with him? You see, that's the trouble with our society. We seem to think that there are some people who can think, do, and behave any way that they like with zero consequence, but if anyone gives them the same treatment in kind or who calls them out on their shit, somehow the person who does that is the baddie. So that's another thing to be keeping in mind with all of that. There is value in people not participating in our attempts at self-deception. I'll put it that way and I'll leave it for right now. The second tenet, humor. Learn to find the humor in all things, especially in yourself. This is how we learn not to be self-righteous assholes. Now, this one, there's not a shred of doubt in my mind that Loki certainly influenced, or at the very least that it is a sentiment of which he approves. One of the things that has come up as he's been working with me is that as a result of all the worry and the anxiety and the legitimate concern I have about what's going on in the world scene, it has in a lot of ways drained the humor out of me. And that isn't healthy. And it's not going to be healthy for me right now. It's not going to be healthy for me if things in a larger scale do take a turn for the worst. And it won't help me deal with whatever it is that the future has in store. But a sense of humor and learning to laugh in the dark, learning to take some kind of joy or delight in things for the ridiculousness that it is, that can be very soul restoring. So that one I have zero doubts of any kind. Third tenet, humility. If you need to tie your balls to a goat to get shit done, suck it up, buttercup. Now, in case you are not familiar with the story, there was an incident in which the goddess Skadi came to the Aesir looking for revenge. I believe it was over the death of her father. And one of the things that came up is, well, if one of the gods can make you laugh, and then they offered her husband and everything else. Well, Loki was actually the only deity who was able to make her laugh, and he did this by tying his man bits to a goat. And I suppose it was so ridiculous and so preposterous and just what is going on here that she couldn't help herself and she did laugh. This does speak to humility, and that's something that a quality that Loki had that the other gods did tend to veer away from. With humility, you understand that sometimes it is your job to do the dirty work. Sometimes you are going to take the hard seat. Sometimes you're not going to be treated particularly fairly, but that is less important. The insult to your person is less important than the job that actually needs to be accomplished. So I do see this. The fourth issue, cunning. Try to think outside the box, and don't make a mess so big that you can't think your way out of it. Tell you what, that's just good general life advice. There comes a point, I think, in everyone's life when you realize that kind of the cookie cutter instruction you've been given, possibly by your parents, by other religious people that you've been exposed to in your life, your school teachers, you realize that their formula for life success and life happiness isn't all that it was cracked up to be. There's stuff that came up that doesn't fit into their nice little box. There are things that they didn't account for, and there are holes in their ideology that we only start to realize once we find ourselves inside of one of those holes, and then we're having to think, okay, what do I do now? And this is when we start really challenging ourselves and questioning our own beliefs. And that is when we are able to start looking outside the parameters that we were given or that we have set for ourselves. Now, about not making a mess so big that you can't think your way out of it, well, I mean, that there is a certain element of responsibility. Yes, you might be going through a bit of a crisis. Yes, you might be thinking that the entire world bears absolutely no resemblance to what you thought it ever was. And I don't think that any of us are on our best behaviors when we go through those chapters in life. However, we are always the first ones to experience the consequences for our actions. So as we are going through our process, we need to keep in mind that we are still responsible for what we do, and we are going to have to accept that, and we're going to have to deal with whatever wreckage is left in our wake. Now, the fifth tenet, transformation. Don't be afraid of change, because that's how we grow. Don't be afraid of self-examination and listen to constructive criticism. 100%. This has the spirit of Loki right here. He is the essence of change, and necessary change. I mean, he's not just like a cat, who's knocking things off the counter just for the hell of it, because, ooh, it fell, and isn't that wonderful? Although, I mean, that can be funny. However, it's always the purpose of his change. He was the one who always got the gods out of the rut that they were stuck in. He was always the one who said, you need to look beyond the end of your own nose for just 5 minutes and realize that things aren't perfect, because nothing is ever truly perfect. And about self-examination and listening to constructive criticism, well, we do have to do that. And sometimes people are so bullied and so afraid to actually say what they think about anything. We don't always get the feedback that we need. And we do need people in our lives who we love, who we trust, who love and trust us, who can give us that pushback when we need it. And when that happens, we need to, we might be offended, we might be out of sorts, we might be cranky about it, but we need to be able to set those emotions aside for a little bit and then just look at the substance of what was said and honestly assess, is there some truth in this? We need this. Without this, we cannot grow. I mean, when people talk about how they feel stuck and they just, no matter what they do, things never really change. Well, it's because you are not doing that self-examination as deep as apparently you need to. Or maybe you're not listening to constructive criticism. Or maybe, just maybe, deep down, you don't actually want to change. You don't want anything around you to change because it is familiar. And there's a great pull towards the familiar, particularly when everything in life is topsy-turvy. But that isn't always what we need. Sometimes we don't need to be coddled. Sometimes we need to say, wake up and pay attention. Now, the sixth tenet, creativity. Create awesome stuff. Try new things out. If you don't like it, blow it up and try again. I think we have to sometimes give ourselves permission to do something poorly and to realize that our first effort at something is not going to be the finished, polished, perfect result that they're wanting. We need to stretch ourselves sometimes and give things a go, especially if we've tried it out before and we weren't particularly good at it. We need to try again. We need to allow ourselves to make ourselves uncomfortable. We need to just see what we can do. And of course, if we don't like it, we're the ones who created it. We can dispose it if we so choose, and we can create something better in its wake. Now, the seventh tenet, accountability. You are the only one in charge of your own destiny, your own life, and your own actions. Own your shit. Now, you might be thinking, well, how could that possibly be a Loki-esque idea? He was always getting out of trouble. Well, he was getting out of messes for sure, and he did so very creatively, and he's not afraid to make use of a loophole if one presents itself. However, he does what he does. And he never claims that he isn't the one who does it. And sometimes he will put it very much in his face of, this is exactly what he's done, and so deal with it. Had to be done. No one else was listening. Someone had to do the dirty work, and the goal was accomplished. And of all the Norse gods, the Aesir, they were, and the Vanir as well, they were always very concerned with fate, fate being unalterable, fate being unavoidable. But when you look at the Lord, you sometimes wonder, were they because they could not conceive of a different future? Did they unconsciously turn that into a self-fulfilling prophecy? Think, oh well, I mean, this is where it's going to end up anyway, so they ended up taking actions that made that outcome 1,000 times more likely. This is something I'm thinking about a lot, because the ideas of fate and free will and all of that, it gets very complicated. It's not a simple, straightforward either or kind of thing. And with Loki, I do see him as being the sort of deity who says, you know what, maybe that's just not so. Maybe the reason why it became such a concrete thing is because no one was thinking of other ideas. No one was thinking about what things actually made that more likely. I mean, he was a law unto himself. Maybe, just maybe, we could all tad to embrace our autonomy the way that he did and make fewer excuses and more choices. Lots of food for thought there. The eighth tenet, empathy. Try to see things from more than one perspective. Walk a mile in someone else's shoes before you pass judgment. Well, Loki walked many a mile in other people's shoes when you think about it, when he was, in disguise or on some mission or whatever else, because of his shape-shifting ability into all kinds of forms. And, there's only so many forms that we know about. There's nothing saying that he was ever limited to only those forms. But he got to see life, the world, the gods, human beings, everything in creation from a lot of different perspectives. And I think that's what made him a lot more flexible. Perhaps it is true that travel broadens the mind, and maybe because he was interacting with everyone around him on a different wavelength than the Aesir were interacting with amongst themselves, maybe that did provide him with a little bit more empathy. When you think about it, a lot of things had to happen before we got to the Locust Center where he was showing up for dinner and causing a ruckus. There was a lot of things that preceded that particular event, and I'm wondering if it was the final push of someone who had been just knocked about too far. There was one too many lines crossed, and so the capacity for empathy met its end. But up to that point, maybe there was a little bit more understanding, a little less judgment, and it was just in that moment, it was just like, nope, we're done here. The ninth tenet, experimentation. A mistake is only a mistake if you do it twice. Until then, everything is an experiment. Now, if you work with Loki, you can probably attest to the fact that he will absolutely call you out on this. If you are engaging in a pattern of behavior that you understand, at least on some level, that it doesn't work out well for you, he's going to call you out on it. And this is also true of thinking patterns. One of the things that he'll say to me if I get distracted during meditations, he'll just start saying, busy brain, busy brain, busy brain, busy brain. And it eventually it knocks me out of it because I realized that my thought process was getting all kinds of caught up with things that did not matter in that moment, were not relevant to the task at hand, and were not helping me. And it's a defense mechanism of my brain, I think, when I'm working through more difficult issues. Because in addition to the work I'm doing with Loki, I'm also participating in the Power of Release workshop at Blackbird's Brew, and that involves a lot of chakra work. And over the past few weeks, a lot of stuff has gotten knocked loose in my system, and it can be difficult. It can be difficult to let that flow through instead of trying to suppress it or ignore it or stamp it out of existence. Sometimes it's about accepting that you do have these energies within you, you do have these feelings within you, but you need to let them flow out. And that can be difficult because none of us want to experience pain. None of us want to relive, moments where we were not exactly at our best, or that we feel embarrassed about, or that we failed. And it's difficult. However, you need to do that. And the mistake has been avoiding this task for as long as I have. But there is a lot to be said for experimentation. My own schedule for the past couple of weeks, especially, it has been extremely topsy-turvy. Loki has thrown a lot of monkey wrenches into my schedule, and it is about breaking me out of a pattern that I was stagnating in and learning how to ride the waves and learning how to go with that flow when the occasion calls for it, and also learning when to say, no, I just need to buckle down and push through. It is a balancing act, and it requires keeping everything flowing. So that's for that. So I do think that overall, these principles, they are very consistent with my own personal experiences with Loki and the nudges that he's been giving me since he came into my life. Our work has focused on healing, on dispensing with illusions, and looking at life in general through a different lens. Now, whether or not Loki actually went to the trouble to inspire someone to write down these tenets, I don't think that particularly matters. It has the Lokian spirit, and it's about exploration, self-reliance, and cultivating a sense of wonder. And I think all of that is something that very much enriches life. And with everything that we're going through, especially on the macro level with world events, I think we do need to reclaim that sense of our life is an extraordinary thing. It has beautiful, wonderful, breathtaking moments. And yes, it has challenges. And yes, these challenges test us. But it is such an exhilarating rush when we meet those challenges. I think we need it. So, I would love to hear your thoughts about this. Please come visit me at Blackbird's Brew on Discord. There's a link to join in the description box below. And of course, as always, please subscribe, like this video, leave me a comment, and I'll see you in another one. Bye.